HR Transform. My name is Tim Flocka, and I lead an organization called Commonwealth. We are a national social impact organization. And I'm really excited to spend some time with you today sharing findings of national research that we did that I think speaks to what's happening in this country in 2020 and to our role as HR leaders. And following this brief run through of our research findings, we're going to have a dynamic panel discussion with two leaders in this space who can help us think about the implications of what we've learned through our research for our role day to day as HR leaders. As I mentioned, I lead an organization called Commonwealth. We are a national social impact organization focused on the financial security and opportunity of vulnerable people in this country. We bring to that work a focus on innovation, specifically discovering ideas, piloting solutions, and driving innovations to scale. To set the stage for this research that I alluded to, I want to take us back, it seems like a really long time ago, but to the beginning of 2019. And you might recall at that point, the federal government shut down, and hundreds of thousands of many very well-paid workers we discovered were no more than a paycheck or two paychecks away from true financial pain. And so this inspired us to ask, what are our perceptions in this country of financial insecurity? What do we understand are the causes? What do we understand are the implications? And who should be playing a part in trying to address this issue? So we set about doing nationally representative research. We surveyed 2,000 workers between the ages of 21 and 70 around the country, around these these questions I described. So let me walk you through the real headlines. The first one, and I want to stress that this data was collected in 2019. So before COVID-19 was even a concept, before we had seen the resulting economic devastation from COVID hitting the country, and before the national outcry of racial injustice. And yet still, more than 80% of these folks that we surveyed said financial insecurity is a major problem in this country. 85% said it can actually happen at any income level. More than half told us that it's common to fall in and out of financial security, and fully 3/4 of us have some personal experience. And we defined in the course of the research financial insecurity as being living paycheck to paycheck. So then we wanted to get underneath this and say, well, what are the causes? And we were just fascinated to see that only 30% of our respondents really pointed to personal causes, things like our behavior choices, our work ethic. Said another way, 70% of our survey respondents told us that financial insecurity in 2019 is really about external factors. And we were very interested to know if that figure held up across our survey respondents. So we looked at it disaggregated it and looked at it by gender and race. And it's really interesting to see that our female respondents were 27% more likely than men to say external factors are at play in financial insecurity. And Black and Hispanic households told us 29% more likely to be external factors than white households. Interestingly too, and again, this is before 2020, we found that half of our respondents said historical discrimination is relevant to financial insecurity in the present, specifically for women and people of color. We didn't know that 2020 would be really an unexpected year in terms of national outcry around racial injustice. But in retrospect, we see actually the seeds of that conversation were already present on our survey respondents' minds in 2019. So why does this matter? What we learned from our survey respondents is that, first of all, financial insecurity is keeping us from getting to our financial goals. And that intuition makes sense. When you're anxious about making it paycheck to paycheck and living through the financial present, it's awfully hard to make progress against our long-term goals. And that finding goes hand in glove with the next one, which is that nearly 3/4 of us say financial insecurity has an adverse impact on our mental health. It's stressful, it causes anxiety. And we know as HR leaders that anxious, distracted workers are less able to bring their best selves to work, less able to provide top quality customer service, and in some cases less likely to be present in the office or in the workforce. Another angle on this, and this data comes from a 2019 MetLife survey, is that we can estimate $250 billion in lost productivity as a result of financial stress and its impact on workers. So from where we sit, we think we see two arrows pointing to this topic. And one is saying this is a practical matter. When we're losing $250 billion of productivity, we should be paying attention to this. And the second one is a moral and ethical problem. When 80% of us, and perhaps more, perhaps fewer of your workers, are walking around really stressed about an issue, that's probably a call to us as leaders to be thinking about what role we can play in solving that issue. Which takes us to the next topic. How do we think about solutions to financial insecurity? And more specifically, what do our survey respondents say about this topic? We were really surprised to see that 65% of our respondents said their employers could and should be doing more to help with financial insecurity. Fully 58% felt the same way about financial services firms. And here too, when we broke that down by race, we see that there is a difference. Black households believed, 81% believed that employers should be doing more to help with financial insecurity, and 72% for financial institutions. So I'm super excited to build from these findings and turn to our panel discussion now. We're very fortunate to have two experts who are on the front lines working with employers and with households to figure out how to make financial security possible. So let me turn to them now and ask Kristin Holt, CEO of GreenPath, and Rebecca Lieberman, founder and CEO of LearnLux, to introduce themselves and explain the organizations that they lead.
Thanks, Tim. My name is Kristin Holt, and I'm CEO of GreenPath Financial Wellness. I'm a CPA and an MBA by education, and I had a passion for saving money instilled in me from a very young age when I was hustling for my first job walking dogs and literally making like $1 an hour when I was 11. My parents always had me save half of every dollar that I earned. And I've had a long career in finance, but my job before this was at United Way in Detroit, where I learned the principles of human-centered design and how to create systemic change that lasts in communities by really understanding the needs of people and better ways to meet those needs. So I've been at GreenPath for the past 4 years, and it really combines my passion for personal finance with my understanding that financial systems don't really work for people, much like you just shared, and that they're really complex to navigate for most of us. And so at GreenPath, we provide free financial counseling and coaching by phone to over 200,000 people per year nationally. And last year alone, our clients repaid over $250 million in debt through our debt management programs. We're a nonprofit, and we partner with banks, credit unions, and employers who refer their people to us for financial wellness coaching and counseling. We believe that improved financial wellness enables people to reach their goals and dreams, and our big, hairy, audacious goal is to remix the American dream so it works for everyone. And we know now more than ever that this work is crucial. So thanks for having me today.
That's great, Kristin. Thank you so much. Rebecca, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Lieberman. I am the co-founder and CEO of a financial well-being company called LearnLux. And my path to get into finance started in an interesting way. In 2012, I was living in Kenya and became really involved in projects in Kenya that were creating access to financial services in new economies. And when I came back to the States in 2015, I started working at a lab at MIT, and my lab was studying macroeconomic trends in financial services. And I became really fascinated with the specific trend of pension plans shifting to 401ks in America, and looking at the massive transformation of how Americans have to save today, and how we now have two jobs, the job of making money and the job of managing money for when we don't want to work anymore. And while I was doing research, I couldn't believe that only about 7% of Americans have access to a dedicated financial advisor. And I thought, how do we create a solution for the 90% of people who would never have access? And so we really created LearnLux to make financial planning accessible to anyone of any asset or income level, we focus specifically on distributing through employers. And so companies get this for their employees so that they have access to always make a plan ahead of time.
Thank you both for those really great introductions. And let's just dive into it. I wanted to start by asking each of you, what of the findings that I just presented really stood out or potentially surprised you? And especially given your experience in your respective organizations, we'd really love to hear your comments. Kristin, why don't you start us?
Sure. So it was a great study. And one of the things I was pleasantly surprised to read that only 30% of respondents linked financial insecurity mostly or exclusively to personal choices, like the behaviors like overspending or poor work ethic. I was really glad to see that people really recognize that it is related to external factors. And one of the reasons it was surprising to me, though, is that when people are calling us at Green Path, they're often coming to us from a place of shame and blame about their situation. And we actually have a mantra that we use that we tell clients, as appropriate. We always say, it's not your fault, you're not alone, and you're going to be okay. And when we first started saying that, there was a little bit of pushback on the, it's not your fault. They're like, well, what if somebody did this or that? And we're like, no, it's nobody's fault. Like the systems just are not designed to work for people. And so we really need to recognize that and then help them move forward. So I was glad to see that.
Thank you. How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I love that point, Kristin. I was really interested to see that 85% of people said that there is financial insecurity across the board at any income level. And I think I see very similar data day to day across all types of employers. We're working in all different verticals, all different geographies. There's generational diversity. And across the board, I see people of all income levels really struggle. And I think sometimes there is a myth that if you're not making a lot of money, that's because that's what causes financial struggles. And you see people living paycheck to paycheck, but who are avidly building credit and making all of the right decisions. And you see people taking home six figures and they don't have the right habits in place. And so they're actually not saving even a small portion of their of the money they're taking home. And so it's really not always about income level. It's about these behaviors that you improve on over time.
I really appreciate you guys calling both of those points out. And just to offer my 2 cents on that, I was struck too by that 85% figure, Rebecca. And, based on our experience, the reality of living on $30,000 or $40,000 a year, is different than living on a lot more. But what's interesting is we seem to all be able to relate to this anxiety that we can have from our finances. And my own view in a moment when there's so much division, if there's something where 85% of us can kind of come together and feel a sense of shared, shared experience, that's really worth something. And Kristin, to your point, I personally have been struck by how quickly the country has really seemed to coalesce around the sense that we can't solve systemic racism just by different choices we make as individuals. We have to think about the institutions and systems, and I just see the parallel so strongly. So just sticking with this, I really wanted to ask you both, and we were talking about in the pre-call how not only are we running businesses or organizations, but we're also employers. And so with both hats, how do you see financial security and insecurity in 2020? And has that changed in any way? I'd love to get your thoughts. Rebecca, can we go to you first on that one?
Yeah. At LearnLux, we really think about financial security and financial well-being, meaning that people feel confident about their financial situation now and as they look forward into the future. And I think that has changed a lot this year with COVID. People's financial vulnerabilities were more exposed than ever. And we were able to see just how much of a problem, having emergency savings was when people were out of work for, even just a couple weeks or a couple months. And obviously that's, perpetuating still. And so I think it's really exposed financial vulnerabilities more than ever, just to see that, everyone always talks about this rainy day fund, but you never know when to use it. And this was the time. And a lot of people weren't ready. And I think it helps us to understand how to prepare people now for the future, for another time when they might need to use a rainy day fund.
So well said.
Yeah, totally agree. And I would just add, so we know financial stress is a really big deal under normal times. And now you add all this additional stress that people are experiencing, worried about this uncertainty and future and getting sick and, you know, just all these worries that we didn't really have day to day. You know, the amount of sleep that we're losing with the compounding effects of this is just mind blowing. And we know when people are stressed, it's very hard to make decisions and it's hard to think. So what we're seeing is actually a lot of inaction happening where people are just kind of frozen in this uncertainty and not doing anything.
And another really interesting statistic from the research talked about, I think, 72% of people said that financial stress causes mental health issues for them. And, you talk about this whole process holistically, if people are stressed about money, it's impacting every other decision they're making. And like you said, it makes them freeze and not make any other decisions the right way. And so again, you talk about this idea of financial security, making sure that you have a plan ahead of time before something happens preemptively. That's, always what we talk about as a company. You don't want everything to happen reactively, which is traditionally how the industry has really worked.
Yes, I'd like to just build on that too. We are really emphasizing to people to make a plan now, even if they didn't have one, because having an action plan where there's steps they can take helps them gain just a tiny bit of control in this such uncertain situation.
I'll just throw in too, we as an organization do an awful lot on savings and emergency savings. And, when things just really started to go sideways in 2020, we wondered, well, is this the moment? Rebecca, to your point, we're all in the mode of drawing down, right, and trying to survive. But in fact, the data shows people are saving at dramatically higher rates. And so I think it just hits Kristin's point that when the rain starts falling, we also start thinking, man, I got to get ready for the next one, or I got to think, anything I can do now to extend through this hard time. I think this is a really natural segue into what is the core of, this conference and this conversation, which is really why should employers care? There's so many challenges in the world, and we obviously have to be smart as HR leaders, which ones we put on our agenda. And so help us think about both that question. Why does it fit in the workplace? And what are the practical options for HR leaders who, are very busy and have to decide where to spend their time and their resources? Kristin, you want to start us on that?
Sure. And I think we've talked a bit about it. When your employees are stressed, they're not going to be performing at their best. And so it's going to affect the work that they do. And right now, again, in this time of just fear and uncertainty, knowing that you care as an employer about their whole world and their well-being and their mental health, I think is going to really help people get through this and going to increase loyalty to employers. I wanted to share a couple things that we have done at GreenPath for our employees, both pre-COVID and then during COVID, just to give some ideas of some suggestions of things that employers can implement just on their own. So two things that we did pre-COVID. One was a couple years ago introducing auto enrollment into 401ks and auto escalation. So we auto enroll at 7%, which everyone was like, that's really high. And we're like, yep, we're going to do it anyway. And we auto escalate at 1% a year, and we re-auto enroll every year. So our employees who opt out have to opt out every year. And this has had a tremendous increase in our participation rates, but also in our savings rates, especially with our under 30 employees. So our average savings per employee went from $1,600 to $3,900 a year. So really big impact there. And then we also did a push this year for our HSA savings enrollment. So we instituted a match of only $300, and we went from 97 employees participating to 225, which was 132% increase, and the HSA savings nearly doubled. And so we felt good coming into COVID that at least we had more people who had now this HSA savings available to them, and we knew they were continuing to save in their 401k. So during COVID, one thing we did, so all of our employees are working, we didn't have any layoffs, everybody's working from home safely, and many of you might be in that same situation, so you might be thinking, well, they're all employed, nobody's experiencing a financial hardship. But we have found so many of our team members, while they're still getting a paycheck from us, have had a reduction in their household income, either by losing a part-time job or a partner has lost income. So we really provided confidential financial coaching to our employees. We offered that up to them. That's what we do for everybody, but we offered it specifically to our employees to make sure that they could just manage through this. We also have a Grant Circle, which is a partner of ours, which is an employee hardship fund where people can get cash assistance if they have a hardship, and they can apply for that confidentially. And we offered one-time PTO buyouts. So many of our employees were expressing concern that, number one, they didn't want to use their vacation because there was nowhere to go. And number two, that they had a cash need right now. And so we offered that to help our employees too.
So much there. Just quickly, I'm curious, especially with the aggressive auto enrollment, was there a communications campaign to explain your motives and sort of what went behind that?
Yep. And we use behavioral economics in our work and how we counsel. So we said it's just natural for us to use behavioral economics on ourselves too. Sometimes understanding those principles can help us take the actions that we want to take, but we just don't take on our own. But yes, there was some significant education campaigns, and we found most people didn't opt out. They just might have lowered the percentage contribution, but they didn't opt out. So they were going in to take an action, and they took an action that was still good, and they just maybe lowered to 5.
Great. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, all day I'm talking to employers of all different sizes and all different industries. And, there's some approaches that work for everyone. There's a couple examples I'm thinking that specifically really resonate for hourly workers and for retail. A lot of times for companies that have a lot of hourly and retail workers, people will leave their jobs for such a nominal raise. It happens across other industries too, but you specifically see it in some of those spaces. Someone gets a really nominal raise and they leave because they think that it will actually make a big difference in their take-home pay. And, what we help employees understand using LearnLux is they can actually optimize their paycheck. And we help them understand, hey, look at the benefits you have. Let's look at HSA. Let's look at FSA, even dependent care FSA. How do we use these pre-tax products to make your money work for you? And a lot of times, that's not HR's job. And so you really need someone to come in and say, here's how you optimize your paycheck. And even if you took a different job, at the end of the day, the take home isn't going to be that different. But if you look at what you're making right now, we can make this work for you a lot better. That goes across all industries. And so, HR spends so much time picking the right benefits, and employees just don't always know what's accessible to them. And for mass America, people's benefits are the pillars of their financial plan. When they're making these decisions around healthcare and retirement, those really reflect what their family's financial situations are going to look like for the year. And so they're massive decisions that employers can really use help with to scale their own jobs. And another interesting thing about this, is I think it's really great when companies are offering programs like 401k. Even at Commonwealth, I think you've done some research where a lot of times people might put money into an account like 401k that they can't touch for a long time when they really should have started to have emergency savings first. And so the LearnLux methodology really helps someone understand what's the order of operations to make these decisions. Let's make sure you have $1,000 of emergency savings before you start contributing to some of these accounts where you won't be able to touch the money, because we don't want you to have to take that hardship withdrawal and get the penalty. And those are things that people just don't know or think about when they're making their plan. And so again, it's holistically thinking about your entire financial picture and making the approach work for all the aspects of your life.
That's great. Just one thing that struck me listening to both of you that I think is really worth raising up is that when we talk about prioritizing worker financial security, that's not the same as necessarily doing a whole bunch of new stuff. In many cases, the puzzle pieces are there. And I just love some of the examples you guys are citing. I hear it in your work, Rebecca, and being able to point out to people the tools that their employer has already gone to considerable effort to make available. And I heard some echoes of that in your comments, Kristin. And in our work, one that comes up a lot is so few people realize that their employer has split direct deposit. And something as simple and unglamorous as that piece of plumbing can really make the difference between someone regularly putting a few bucks into emergency savings, which is, we believe, really the foundation of that personal financial security. And I guess one more thing to offer on that, and I'm curious in your reactions, is that simply sort of seeing this issue and being willing to address it in how you talk to workers might really be an area of differentiation. And it's obviously dicey to talk about people's financial situation. We all consider this very, very personal. But when you got 81% of your workforce walking around in pain, there is a dividend to be harvested by the employers who figure out a way to see that and to name that and to accept that, and then to tie it to some of the tools they offer today, whether it's split direct deposit or HSAs, or in some cases to consider new services that specifically speak to that reality. I wanted to, we'll see if this question resonates or not, but I wanted to play devil's advocate for a little bit. Again, knowing that we have an audience here that's very busy, I imagine some folks are saying, this is all well and good, but why is this the employer's problem? Isn't this really a personal issue? And shouldn't we stay away from that? And I'm just curious if either of you, Rebecca, I saw you kind of react, so maybe you want to take this one. What would you say to someone who's sitting there saying, not my work? In fact, better to stay away.
Absolutely. So we've actually hired a lot of people who used to work in HR. And so I really, look at the problems that happen. And HR is usually the most, overworked, understaffed team. And really, employees are the lifeblood of every company. And the job is really escalated in the last couple of years. It's such an important role, this HR and chief people officer role. And so what we found is that financial well-being can actually scale the role of HR. So take, for example, open enrollment. Every company has to go through open enrollment. People are making these massive financial decisions that will impact their lives and their families' lives. And you're sitting there and you wish you could sit with every employee and help them make the right decision and understand a high deductible healthcare plan and understand their insurance options. But usually there's 600 employees to every one person in HR. It's just not possible. And what we found is that through LearnLux and financial well-being products, you as an HR leader can actually scale your role. You can actually say, hey, we can communicate benefits information through this platform. We can, help people understand what's being offered, how to optimize their paycheck, think of open enrollment as a financial checkup, and really evaluate what's going on in their lives. And so we've seen it as a way to really scale the HR function. And that's how we help employers understand how this really works with their own day-to-day.
Thank you. Kristin, anything you want to add on this?
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And I think, like you were saying earlier, you're really just making sure that your team is leveraging the tools that you've already put in place. But if they don't understand them and they're not utilizing them, you just kind of wasted all this money on something that's not getting leveraged in the right way and not getting you the ROI that you've already put into it. So the more we can automate that, we have some tools at GreenPath too that we have rolled out both externally and internally. And one is an online platform where we can do savings challenges and things like that. And we had an employee during COVID reach out and say, hey, I'm really glad that we did this savings challenge and I went through this and I had created my emergency fund and now I've got this emergency and I had the $1,000 there and that's exactly what it cost. And now I'm getting back to rebuilding that same emergency fund because I had the tools in place. So, and even, we're a company that this is what our team does every day is they're providing financial coaching and counseling, but they still need the assistance just like everyone does.
Well said. Yeah, and that anecdote of the immense gratitude, really, that workers can feel when they sense, they know that you didn't do it all for them, but you saw the problem and you put something on the table and you named it, and that's oftentimes enough, to get people started.
And
Kristin, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Quickly, Tim. I think it's interesting, even a lot of times if you in conversation, HR leaders will share that they're getting hundreds of emails every week asking questions even about, tax withholdings and, someone wants to make a big decision like buy a home and, a lot of companies are going public or they have employee stock purchase plans and people don't know how to utilize them the right way. These are all questions that a lot of times employers can't actually answer and they legally can't answer or they don't feel comfortable. And so having, the ability to talk to a financial advisor on demand, having a financial well-being platform really allows you to then offer that resource to your employees in that time of need. So it's really nice to be able to say, hey, I can't necessarily answer that, but we have a resource that will help you with this massive financial decision that you're thinking about.
Rebecca, just to follow up on that, but how is that different from what we might now call sort of old school financial wellness platforms? Is that really the same thing?
Traditionally, a lot of times someone would come into an office and they would do a lunch and learn, and maybe a couple people would show up, but you've mentioned this, people are really embarrassed to talk about their finances. There's a lot of trust issues, and there's just a lot of embarrassment around what I should and shouldn't know because we were never taught this, in the education system. And so imagine you're sitting in a room with a bunch of your colleagues and peers. Very few people would actually raise their hand and ask a question, especially a question that maybe is a burden in their financial life. And so that never really worked. It kind of checked the box for companies, but it never really provided impact. And the industry is changing so much now where there's really, three big trends that I would say you're seeing now when companies implement financial well-being. With COVID, you can't even have those, lunch and learns anymore. What you're really seeing is this mixture of a digital platform and human advisors. And so, the platform lets people, understand, their financial to-do list and learn and make a plan. And they can do that at their own pace at home with their partner. They don't have to be embarrassed about what they don't know. And then the ability to have access to on-demand financial advisors, really adds this other level of, relationship. You can ask all of your questions, again, in that one-on-one environment. I think the second biggest trend is this idea of independent and unbiased. Traditionally, some 401k providers were trying to do financial well-being, but a lot of times they were just, again, pushing for assets under management, where really having an independent, unbiased solution allows employees to make the decision that's best for them. In some cases, that's 401k. In some cases, again, it's emergency savings first. And so making sure that when you're working with a financial advisor, they're a fiduciary, they're independent. And that's become more and more of a priority in the society that we live in today. And the third biggest trend that I see is around holistic financial well-being. And traditionally, again, you saw a lot of point solutions. Retirement is a piece of your financial life, but it's just one piece. And so really, at LearnLux and what you're seeing in the industry is covering a range of topics, everything from paying off your high interest credit card debt to saving for your kids' college to estate planning and everything in the middle. All of your employee financial decisions, but the personal ones as well that aren't tied to your employer. So it's really changing, and a lot of the programs that are rolling out today are much more robust than some of the things that just checked the box previously.
One thing you said just reminds me of an anecdote that I experienced, which was a retirement industry person saying to me, kind of under their breath and in a way that I imagine they wouldn't want to be associated with, but they said, honestly, I think I have clients who come and say, I've got a bunch of workers who are living the issues we're talking about, worrying about next week and the week after, and we don't really have a good answer. And so what we do is we say, well, we have this financial wellness platform, and the truth is we know that was really created with a very different use in mind. In some cases, much more highly compensated, much more secure workers who are thinking about optimizing their portfolio or something. And what I took away from that is that we as HR leaders have such an important role to keep saying, we need this tool, and to just be aware that for that representative of a provider, you're actually helping to shape what they offer. If you say, that's not what I asked for, I want something different, and then they can take that back to their colleagues and say, the market is demanding something that's not what we have. So that was sort of a light bulb moment for me, because it's easy to miss that in those one-on-one conversations, to realize we have this ability to shape what lands on our desk. Kristin, I wanted to pivot to you and just talk about this issue of debt, because my sense is that GreenPath is a national leader in this. And is there anything you can help us understand about the role of debt in worker financial security and what can be done about it, especially through an employer lens?
Sure. So, debt just causes such huge stress for people. When you talk about the financial stress, it's often debt that is causing that, and it prevents people from saving for their emergency savings or saving for retirement when, you know, you really need to save early for that to make the biggest impact. And so at GreenPath, we do a lot of the things that Rebecca described. You know, we really look at the person's entire situation, but that stress of debt is often just the biggest barrier. And so we partner with employers and financial institutions. They send people to us and we provide free counseling for them, and we can give them options to pay down their debt that are much more economical and just work within their cash flow system. We're able to get interest rates reduced for people and then put them on a fixed payment plan that ties with when they get paid, so that they can get that debt paid off in usually about 3 years, you know, 5 years at the most. And the biggest thing we hear from people is that they wish they would have called us sooner. So it's one of those things where, again, I think people get frozen, or they take the actions they think they should be taking, or maybe they take out another 0 interest rate card to pay off a higher interest rate card, those kinds of things. You know, sometimes I've listened to a call recently where the guy had already cashed in his 401k to pay off debt, taken a home equity loan on the house to pay off debt. And like, we really can help people understand their options and make the right decision for them. And so I just hate when they've already exhausted a bunch of options and we're like, oh, we could have probably come up with something that would have been better than that. And so, you know, we just want people to know that we're a resource out there. We're a nonprofit. We have a lot of information on our website at greenpath.org. And so just don't navigate this alone. And it, you know, debt just creates so much stress and people feel so alone.
I love that. The biggest monster can be slayed, right? You know,
it can.
Age-old advice of name it, you know, and address it. So we're coming towards the end of our time. I wanted to round out the panel by just asking each of you sort of a lightning round. You know, we have this opportunity here today to talk with HR leaders. What's the one message you really hope these HR and benefits and other leaders walk away from this conversation? Rebecca, can you get us started?
Yeah. You know, I think now more than ever, we are working at home. Home is work. You know, people are bringing their full selves to work, and it looks like no other time. And so I think it's really important to remember that the number one stress in people's lives is financial stress, and they'll bring that burden with them to work. And again, like we said at the beginning, it doesn't stop at any specific income level. Everyone has questions. No one knows who to trust. And employers can really help if they help their employees make a plan ahead of time. And so, you know, we love to be a resource in that capacity.
Kristin?
Yes, and I totally agree. And I would just add, you know, don't ignore it, communicate, and you and your team don't need to navigate this alone.
Great. Well, let me just, you know, wrap up and first of all, thank both Kristin and Rebecca for their time and their insights. And, you know, I would just say 2020 for me has been a year about all of our pain being on display. And, you know, that is not comfortable, but I feel like it creates new opportunities to have conversations and deal with problems that clearly have been on all our minds. You know, in our research, 81% of us around financial insecurity. And I just have a strong feeling that the pioneers who get out ahead and try to recognize that and talk about it, you don't have to solve it entirely. You don't have to have the perfect answer, but having the empathy and the courage to see those issues and communicate about them and take some action will offer huge rewards. The survey that I started the session with, we are releasing today, the full report on our website, buildcommonwealth.org. And, you know, we do work by partnering with real organizations and HR leaders and can bring resources to help you on problems that we know might be down on your list, but you want to get to. So consider that an open offer from Commonwealth to be a partner and to help you in addressing some of these issues and taking action. Thank you all so much for your time, and stay safe out there, stay healthy.
Thank you.